Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming by. Would you mind just filling up the front seats? Right at the front. Yeah, just fill out the gaps. We'll be starting pretty soon. Yep. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Sean, a co-founder of Digis Global, the asset tokenization company, as well as the founder of the Ethereum Singapore meetup. So we're very privileged and honored to have with us here today Mr. Michael Wuehler, who comes from New York City. He is the blockchain evangelist at ConsenSys, INFURA master, as well as the founder of the Ethereum New York City group. Ethereum New York City meetup is one of the top 3 largest Ethereum meetup groups around globally. And I'm always learning a lot more from him as well as the other guys that come around here. So without further ado, let us welcome Michael to give us a talk on INFURA as well as MetaMask. Michael, please.
Thanks, Sean. This is just like college. Nobody wants to sit in the front row, all right? I'm very excited to be here. This is an incredible venue. As Sean said, I run the New York City Ethereum meetup, and I would probably give 1 or 2 Ether to have a venue like this to host my events. This is great. So I'm going to talk tonight about INFURA, which is the project that I'm running at ConsenSys, which is an infrastructure project. And I'll talk about MetaMask later and how the two work together and how MetaMask and INFURA really complement each other as tools to facilitate the development on the Ethereum platform. Slide's not working. Okay, what's that? Oh, okay. Can you go ahead? So just introduce myself quickly again. I studied math and information systems at Brigham Young University many years ago. I also received an MBA from University of Chicago. That was the last time I was in Singapore, about 4 years ago. Is anyone here familiar with the Chicago booth Singapore campus? Yeah. So, any alumni, by chance? No. Okay. Anyways, they're not here anymore. They went to Hong Kong, but I think my career started in 1995 in an internet startup. So a very similar environment to I think that we're in right now in the blockchain space. It's like the internet was a technology that came along and introduced a lot of change and a lot of disruption. I think we're in that same spot again. I went through a bubble and a burst and all of that. We'll probably do that again here, but just make sure we stay on the right side of that bubble. I was, after that, for 11 years at Bank of America in information in the technology infrastructure organization. I used to run middleware and messaging teams globally for the global markets line of business. And then finally, COO for the global engineering team. I've had a long time spent in the crypto space, and I always wanted to get into it, and I decided that this time around, I wasn't going to let it pass me by, so last summer, I talked to Joe Lubin and got started at ConsenSys. Shortly after that, I got into this INFURA project because of my background in infrastructure. As I said, I became heavily involved in around 2014, when the Ethereum project first was announced. And in that summertime, I really wanted to meet like-minded people just to talk about Ethereum and the capabilities that might happen. I thought maybe I'd do a startup, I don't know. So I started a meetup in New York City at the time, and that's when Joe Lubin showed up to my first meetup. I think he basically just wanted to find out who the hell I was, because at that point the community was so small, everybody knew each other. But it's grown from there. We have about 2,500 people in New York. I think the energy in here, our meetups are about this size, about the same number of people, even though we do have like so many more people. The venues are about this big, so we get about this group, so there's a lot of energy here. It's great. Meetups. So Gavin, I know the parity stack is very popular in Singapore. Gavin came once. Of course, Joe's there all the time. So I really enjoy that. But I will get into why I'm here tonight to talk about some other things. Oh, before I do that, just a quick announcement from ConsenSys. So ConsenSys is running a blockchain challenge for developers. So the program is a 10-week all-immersive online training program, 9 weeks of online, and the 10th week is an all-expense paid trip to Dubai to work with our teams in Dubai on real projects that are going on in that space. After that, you can graduate and get a certificate from ConsenSys as a blockchain developer. We feel like that certificate is valuable, and hopefully the market would agree that having that certificate demonstrated some value in the marketplace. And also an opportunity to work for ConsenSys after that if you pass the course. So these are the dates. It's August 1st to October 10th. That's the 10-week program. I'll get out of the way so you can see it's academy.consensys.net is the URL if you want some more information on what we're doing there. But the idea is to build the developer community. There's a real shortage right now in software developers and software engineers who are familiar with smart contract development. So this is our approach to try to bootstrap the efforts and really facilitate our projects globally and in Dubai, and hopefully here soon. All right, so let's talk about the technology cycle. So this is your business school slide, the diffusion of technology. You've got your innovators, early adopters, early majority. So where would you say we are in the blockchain space here? I would say we're, well, I had some animations, but they don't really work. So we're kind of in this early adopter phase right here. So if you go back to like the late 80s and early 90s, like what type of things were you seeing in the personal computer space when you were sitting at this thing? You have blue screen of death. A lot of young folks in here, maybe you don't know what blue screen of death is because your PCs have always worked. But back in those days, like you would just be working along on your PC and this blue screen would come up and this message is so helpful you just don't know what to do about it. But so you just reboot and go on. Or on the Mac, it was a little more friendly. As always, the Mac's all right. They had a sad Mac, but at least it didn't try to trick you. This also happened in the internet. So when the internet was diffused in the late 90s, you had things like AOL having a 19-hour outage. You had eBay having a 24-hour outage. They lost $3.5 million of sales in 24 hours. Interestingly, Amazon sells about $500 million in one day. So this is all the stuff that's happening when you're right at this stage. And I would say like in blockchain technology, we're probably at this stage as well. So what's going on? You've got the DAO happening. You've got Mt. Gox happening at these stages. So what happens? Jeffrey Moore wrote a book and talked about like why this happens at this particular spot in the cycle. And he decided that there's this thing called this chasm that happens right about that stage. And that's where you have this kind of difficulty in moving people who are early adopters and innovators into like more mainstream technology. So you got this jump that's got to happen. So let's dig into the math here. What happens? Why does that chasm exist? Happiness equals reality minus expectations. So this chasm exists because the reality of the technology isn't at the same level as the expectations for the technology at that point. So you have this kind of negative issue going on. So Vlad, many of you know Vlad. I call him the chief sanity officer for Ethereum. He tweeted this recently: Ethereum isn't safe or scalable. It's immature experimental tech. Don't rely on it for mission critical apps unless absolutely necessary. At the time, the Bitcoin maximalists came out in droves and said, see, like if Vlad says that Ethereum is doomed, then it must be doomed. Even people in the Ethereum community were like, well, why would Vlad do that? And the reality is what Vlad was basically doing is he was trying to resolve this happiness thing. So if the rate of change of expectation is greater than the rate of change of reality, you're going to have a case where reality is less than the expectation, and you're going to be not very happy. And so that's what Vlad's trying to do. He's trying to rein in this fact. I think this space is moving so fast that we have, like, the reality of the actual technology is not keeping up with what industry, what the expectations are. So we have to really kind of control that. All right, so that's enough of that. How do you get across that chasm? So you identify friction points, barriers, and then you build tools to reduce or eliminate those. So that's what we did with INFURA. What are some friction points? Obviously, we know scaling. We know all the work that's going on with Casper and sharding. People very much smarter than me are working on these problems. Privacy, the ZK snarks on Ethereum stuff. JP Morgan did their quorum with Constellation. Identity, so Uport from ConsenSys is one particular approach that's trying to solve this problem. Key management, I think, is a huge issue as well in this space. So this is a real big problem, getting people across that chasm of a regular user who today is used to opening a brokerage account or a bank account, and if they get hacked or they lose their key or they lose their password, they can just call that bank or call that brokerage, and they can pretty much get that all resolved, get a new password, get their money back. And we all know that doesn't happen. As much as like the people on Reddit believe that Vitalik just has a dashboard and he can just assign Ether however he wishes, that's really not the case. If you lose your keys, you can't get it back, and that's another big problem. And there's more challenging ones. So in this old case, this is the way it is today. You've got Alice, who's used to communicating with Bob. She sends her message in through one of these services who knows how to route that message over to Bob. But what happens if Bob one day decides he wants to move to a decentralized network? He doesn't want to use these services anymore. So Bob moves over to Ethereum. Alice doesn't know what Ethereum is, so she has her phone. She doesn't realize that she has to somehow interact with the Ethereum network. So she doesn't know what to do. Bob is frustrated. She's frustrated. So this brings to INFURA. So our goal with INFURA is to provide the world with secure, stable, fault-tolerant, and scalable Ethereum and IPFS nodes. So what does that mean? Here's some of the features. INFURA features are public TLS or HTTPS enabled endpoints for the Ethereum mainnet and the testnets. So that's a big key right there. All the testnets. So we support Ropsten, we support Kovan. I know Kovan's very popular in Singapore. Rinkeby, InfuraNet, which is our kind of test network at ConsenSys we use. It's very similar to Kovan with proof of authority on parity and shorter block times. And we believe there will be more. So with the permutation of consensus algorithms, pluggable consensus, and different situations, we believe that these test networks are going to continue. And so until you have a cross-blockchain interoperability solved where you can actually move transactions across, which there's projects going on to do that, but until you have that, if you need to test your application in multiple networks, it becomes very painful for you to set up and install and run like all these different permutations of test networks. So for example, Uport faces this problem today. They have, they're kind of a fundamental identity system. They have users on all the different test nets. So now you have an identity on all these different test nets, and it's challenging for them to kind of move back and forth. So they have to deploy their code on all these different test networks. And if they have a user on one test network who wants to send a Uport transaction to a user on another network, it's not going to work. So what we're trying to do is provide tools to enable this to happen. We have a portable interface, so we're compatible with the standard JSON RPC APIs. So the set of APIs that are if you Google JSON RPC Ethereum, you have a list of APIs. You can use all of those same APIs. And then there's these wrapper libraries. Web3.js is very popular. ETH.js, written by Nick Dodson, very popular. There's the Java EtherJ by Connor, Python, et cetera. So you're not locked in to a particular backend provider. You can just use your standard libraries, and we'll do that. We also have a worldwide peering footprint, and I'll talk about that more in a minute, but the goal there is to strive to have a very robust global peering network for our service, so that when you relay a transaction to the network, you can hopefully be assured that it will get propagated to the network as quickly as possible. We support multiple client Ethereum backends, so we support Parity and Geth, which are the two primary. This becomes very important when you have an attack on the network, which happened a lot last fall, happened just last week. So the Go client had an issue. We were able to route traffic to Parity and continue to process blocks until we're able to get Geth back online. We provide a public TLS endpoint for IPFS. So IPFS is decentralized storage. It's very popular in the development space. We work closely with Juan Benet and the Protocol Labs people to make sure that we're keeping up with them. We just upgraded our infrastructure last week to the latest version of IPFS. Swarm, I don't have it listed here, but Swarm is, we keep that on our mind. There's going to be a summit next week in Berlin with Victor Tron and his team to discuss Swarm, so we're sending people there to kind of work with them. We want to make sure that we're in tune with what they're doing so we can ultimately deliver Swarm services publicly as well to the development community. We have a service layer called Ferryman. This is what sometimes is called our secret sauce, so that's kind of our transaction broker, unique to us, that we've written to help us do additional services for scalability and logging, throttling of requests. That helps us to work with denial of service attacks if those come up. And caching, as I mentioned, so obviously one of the big requests we get on our service is tell me the latest block number, which obviously doesn't change every 14 seconds or so. So we can do caching on some requests as they come in to get efficiencies of scalability. And all of this can be deployed as a private or consortium blockchain, which we have done for enterprises for POC type things. So this is what our architecture looks like. So you have your decentralized applications out there in the world, and they can connect in through our load balancers for whatever network they'd be going to. So whether it's the main net, I just generically have testnet, but it's all the testnets, and IPFS. That routes basically with a little bit of capability there. We do, if you're familiar with our service, we have kind of an access token that you get when you register for our service. And we do a little bit of layer 7 switching there to send requests into our Ferryman service layer. Ferryman is a process that, as I said, does some logging, so SQL for logging, Redis for caching. Ferryman will then determine the best way to handle that request coming in, and we'll route it out to our cluster of nodes, whether that's a testnet on Geth or Parity, IPFS, and then, of course, those are pairing with the rest of the main Ethereum and IPFS networks. We call it a boomerang. It's a little bit of a marketing thing. It's just the way we shaped it, but it's catchy. Okay, I talked about global peering, so let me just quickly talk about what that means. So we deploy a simple peering node in all 32 Azure data centers around the globe. When we start our Ethereum nodes in our main, so those don't run RPC at all. They're simply there for peering to the rest of the network. When we start our main INFURA nodes, we bootstrap those with these 32, so we instantly have 32 peers globally, which hopefully allows us to be 1 or 2 hops away from almost any node on the rest of the Ethereum network. I don't update these slides, and I think 10,000 is low now, but you have to kind of update slides like once a week or you quickly lose count. So this one, this slide I completely ripped off. I haven't seen Chris, but I completely ripped this off from Chris's presentation a few months ago when he talked about, I really liked the way he talked about the zero client gateway. So a zero client is just a client that runs in the JavaScript in the browser itself or in the application itself and doesn't have a full node behind it. So how does it work? It uses a gateway service to access the Ethereum network. So INFURA is effectively a gateway service. So what does this do? This gives you the ability for minimal hardware requirements. So you can run on a phone. This is how you can run Ethereum applications on your cell phone. It provides convenience, so you don't have to wait to sync the node. So you instantly are connected straight to the latest block when you open your application. You don't have to do any sort of syncing. Provides redundancy. So as I said before, we have load balancing in place. We have routing in place for failover. So the gateway service is able to handle that more efficiently than if you just are developing or using a single node that may fall over at any minute. And finally, it allows for offline type of application, so you can have your application do some sort of signing or some sort of processing offline, and then queue that and then relay that transaction to the network when that node comes back online. So this is how Infura looks in a picture form as a zero client. So you've got your user applications, your static app that runs just in the browser, and then it relies on the Infura Ethereum gateway to connect in and out of the rest of the network instead of having to run its own node itself. So back to this picture, it eliminates Alice's requirement to have to figure out and know how to run an Ethereum node. She can depend on the developer of her application to just provide that zero client gateway that allows her to communicate with Bob without having to do that, run one of these nodes herself. So what are some applications of scaling? One very useful application that's become more and more valuable lately is bursting and scaling during peaks of traffic, which we've seen in these token launches. It's actually getting quite ridiculous that you're getting $30 million in 2 blocks on the Ethereum blockchain. But use case, for example, Gnosis, when they did their sale. So in some cases, when you try to if you have one single node and you're trying to run everything, that node might become overwhelmed and not be able to process those transactions. But if you use a service that has kind of the ability to scale and auto-scale a little bit, you have this opportunity to take advantage of scaling. I won't go into, I know this is a touchy subject, I won't go into token launches too much, but the general thing is as applications are going to be getting into production, there might be use cases where there's batch type activities that require your backend node to be able to scale quickly. I don't know if any of you remember Slashdot. There was that, they used to call it Slashdotting, where they would link to a site and that site would basically go down because it couldn't handle the traffic. So here's our growth I'd like to talk about. So this actually is about a month old at this point, but I left it in here. So about a month ago, we were responding to 175 million requests a day, which was up from around 20 million about a month before that, or 3 months before that. But instead of just updating this, I left it in and I just put in today. So this is our traffic today. We peaked at about 850 million requests a few days ago. We're processing, I guess, around 500 million a day. So just like any metric you'll look at on the Ethereum network that has to do with growth, it's kind of like up and to the left, up and to the right, you know, lots of growth. So again, I'll talk a minute about MetaMask and like how MetaMask can leverage a service like Infura to handle its growth. But the goal again for Infura is just to eliminate a little bit of a friction point for developers and applications so that we can get these users moved on past this early adopter phase and into where we can get everyone else, my mom and grandma. So I'm going to switch now to talk about MetaMask. So MetaMask is, I talked about us as Infura as a gateway service. MetaMask is a zero client, effectively. How many people have used MetaMask, familiar with MetaMask? Okay, so actually not too many. So good, we'll talk about it. So MetaMask, and I'll put this disclaimer because we're being streamed and I'm not on the MetaMask team. I'm going to do my best. I talked to them about it and they helped me with this presentation. But I'll do my best to talk about MetaMask, but I apologize if I don't get it right. So MetaMask is Ethereum for everyone. So what is it? MetaMask is a web extension for the Chrome browser. What it is it allows you to put effectively a wallet into your Chrome browser so that it interacts with Ethereum. So you can go in Chrome to the extension store and search for MetaMask and install it, and in seconds you'll have a web browser you'll have a Ethereum wallet in your web browser. This is what it looks like. So it's just, as you see at the top right, the MetaMask Fox. You just click on that Fox and you'll have your accounts. You see it's the Ropsten network there, but that's really a drop down, so you can switch to any network. Kovan is supported. Also, of course, the main nets. So then you have an Ethereum address, and you can send Ether to and from that address. And this lives all inside your browser. It doesn't have any back-end dependency other than just Chrome and the extension. So what it does is it enables the Web3 API from inside your browser. It intercepts the calls to Web3 functions and processes them if it's available. So in the normal way, you would have to have a localhost blockchain running on your computer to run a blockchain application through your browser. What this does is it eliminates it and it intercepts that, so you don't have that dependency anymore. So back in that picture before where we had Alice, who would have to install this Ethereum on her computer or phone, which is impossible. Now in this case, she doesn't have to anymore. She can just use MetaMask. So what happens when a website sends a transaction, like a web3.eth.send transaction, which is very common if you're going to interact with a smart contract. MetaMask will intercept that and prompt you to sign that transaction. So again, this is your wallet. You'd sign the transaction, and it would relay that transaction through INFURA into the Ethereum blockchain. So what is the state of the extension? So the current dApps, I'll just run through a few of these. So roulette, this is how you can play roulette in your browser. It uses MetaMask to make your bets and receive your payouts if you win. EtherRisk, I think, have they been here? EtherRisk? EtherRisk is a flight insurance company, which was first demonstrated at DevCon 2. It's in Shanghai. But they allow you to buy flight insurance, flight delay insurance, and the way that you can do that just in your browser and not have to worry about an Ethereum node is through the MetaMask plugin as well. EtherPlay, which is gaming, of course. So that's, again, just like roulette, you can play games in your browser for Ether. ETHLance, which is a job site where you can post a job and propose to give away Ether for someone, or you can become a freelancer and take jobs. So this is also supported by MetaMask. Aragon, they recently had a token launch, so you can use Aragon in your browser using MetaMask. And then dApps coming soon. I think Gnosis is on its way soon, so it'll be fully supported with MetaMask. Again, the key here is adoption from regular users. So how do we get regular users of the internet who are comfortable using a web browser to use these dApps, these decentralized applications? They need to kind of eliminate as much friction as we can to get them to do that. Wayfund. So Wayfund is a crowdfunding type platform developed by ConsenSys, the team in Toronto at ConsenSys. And they recently announced their first campaign, which is the Braid movie, which will be the first feature-length film, which is fully financed by Ethereum. And Boardroom, again, a governance tool. So I'm just going through these, but what about other cool stuff? So I'll step out of the way so you can read this. This is a really cool article from Alex Miller that he wrote about how you can use Ethereum and MetaMask and never have to use passwords again. It's kind of over my head, so you might want to just go read it if you're interested. Their obligatory growth rate, again, it's up and to the right. So you can see in the last 4 months, it's just been explosive growth. So I think, again, it's just the interest in the Ethereum community is being manifest in many ways. So let me just quickly talk about the roadmap. They're going to work on advanced account management. So as I said, MetaMask is completely in the browser at this point, which can be a bit problematic if you forget to save your 12-word seed phrase, and your computer crashes, then you've kind of lost your wallet. So they're working on advanced account key management, whether it's with the Ledger hardware wallet, or other identities like UPort or multi-sig proposals. So that's coming. I'm not sure what this slide is telling me. Anyway, they're working on a new UI. So they recognize that in the current MetaMask plugin space, it's kind of a small window, so there's not much real estate to compare it to something like the real estate that you have in Parity with the full browser window. They've hired, I think I can say this, they've hired a UI UX person from Apple to come in and help them build a more representative UI that helps them work more with tokens, work with contract parameter displays. So right now it functions very much just like a straight wallet, send, receive, but it's getting more complex with all of these tokens. You need to be able to kind of work with your different tokens, as you can see here. So that's coming as well. And then light clients. So they're working on with WebAssembly to get a Ethereum client strictly within the browser. So basically eliminate the extension requirement. I feel like that's a little bit of an adoption issue, asking people to have to go download an extension that they have to trust. So there's some innovations coming with in Chrome right now that are allowing them to build straight within the web browser, and that would give them the full display window to be that gateway into using your wallet and things. And then local state caching, so offline type activity. So if you're on an airplane and you want to interact with an application, you can do what you can do, and it'll queue up your transactions, and then when you come online, it will relay those to the network. So that's some of the stuff that they're doing. MetaMask is an example of something that really leverages a backend service like INFURA. So I will take questions.
Great. Any questions? Yep.
Is MetaMask trying to introduce? So MetaMask doesn't dictate that standard, although they contribute quite a bit to it. I think the Web3 folks are different people. Off the top of my head, I can't remember.
Because if it can go on WASM, one day it could just, be part of Chrome. Maybe.
Be part of Chrome, but they still have to have an API gate. Like they still have to participate with the Ethereum on the back end, and so you need some standards. So Web3 is a standard of the RPC interface into the RPC server on the clients themselves. Yeah. Yep.
Question on nodes. I'm trying to install a full node. It's taking forever.
Yes.
And I'm obviously assuming INFURA and MetaMask are designed to help that out. Who should be running a full node, and how do you envision this sort of,
So I think that's exactly why INFURA exists, so that developers don't have to install their own nodes. Does anyone in here have a full Ethereum node on their laptop? I do. It's pretty hard, right? I mean, it's getting harder and harder. You have to turn it on every few days to keep it synced. It's using about 100 gig of space or something like that. And we're only 2 years in on this network. Imagine in 5 or 7 years, it's just not going to be reasonable. So out of those people who have Ethereum nodes, do any of them have any of the test network nodes on their laptop? CEO of Taurus. No, but so anyway, the challenge is keeping all of these networks synced and on your laptop so that you can use them when you need them. So that's kind of the point of INFURA, is to take that away, to provide an option for development in an environment where you don't necessarily want to have to do that.
is that going to change with Casper?
Change what?
Is this sort of
Yeah, so that's interesting. So it'll be challenging. I mean, that's another point. So there's like you can do the fast sync, and you can do just block headers, and you can do things like that. But a lot of the calls when you're developing use like get logs, and you'll need like the full block data to get your responses. So we do the full sync. We have the full entire chain. We sync from Genesis every time. We don't do any sort of dumps of the chain or so.
Hi, thanks very much for your presentation. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the INFURA architecture. You might have already covered this point before, and I didn't quite catch it because there's so much content going on. But because with the Ferryman service layer, the DApps go through that, and you still use SQL and Redis there before pushing it over to, I guess, the Ethereum side. So doesn't that mean that although you've built auto-scaling into the system, but there would be a possibility that, say, if Ferryman goes down, then people won't be able to access Ethereum through Ferryman and INFURA anymore? So that's a possible vulnerable point there. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Ferryman is, I think it showed up on the screen as one box, but it is also a scaled, horizontally scaled system that also has back-end load balancers coming from it. So we don't have a dependency with one Ferryman node. I think there is that question of, okay, so why do I trust INFURA to send my transactions? Maybe you're going to do something with them. And that's a fair thing. So we don't expect that we're the one solution for every and all developers if you want to run your nodes. But at least for the people for the companies that we have been servicing, primarily it started with ConsenSys projects. We opened it up to the kind of the public network, and we have lots and lots of different projects, interesting projects, using our service, so they seem to be fine with it. Like I said, for now, the idea was let's reduce friction for the development community so that hopefully we can get more and more applications deployed. That's really the goal for now for the Ethereum network. We're a free service. I actually didn't talk about like how to actually engage with us if you want to use us. So we're a free service. We don't, at the current time, do any throttling of the service. Unless you start spamming us, then we'll throttle you very quick. But we don't throttle. I don't know. Is there any CodeTrack guys in here? So there's a company here in Singapore called CodeTrack that uses us quite a bit. They've done things like hard fork countdowns, and they have an ENS dashboard that uses us. For now, we're free. Go to infura.io, and you can sign up and just try it out.
Thanks. I see it as a kind of a short, like you said, a stopgap thing, because you have to rely on it for now to get everything up and running and working, but you don't really want to have to rely on it over time, because otherwise you're depending. It's not it's not distributed anymore.
That's right.
So is your business model that you will exist for a while and then disappear, or?
No, I think that, we recognize that, and we've always said that. That's kind of, it's a decentralized network, so why would I rely on a centralized service? As I said, I don't think that will be for everybody, but I do think that there'll be companies that start to stand up production applications. So there's a spectrum of decentralization, right? And some people are on this far side where they're very, and there's other people that are kind of further away on the spectrum. I think that as companies, so the cost that we currently incur to maintain this infrastructure is non-trivial. And as other applications in this space grow and start to have similar traffic needs and infrastructure needs, they're going to have to decide if they want to stand that up themselves and pay for people to do that themselves, or if they wouldn't, if they're comfortable offloading that service. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, for now, I said I presented this as a stopgap. I definitely don't want to be out of a job anytime soon, so I like what we're doing, and we'll have to go from there. But I don't know if that resolves. We can talk afterwards.
It doesn't really, but I know what you mean. I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's fair enough. It's this stopgap period. So, but
I
think
mean, the
people
ConsenSys family, I think, will be very happy continuing to use us. MetaMask users continuing to use us. If that presents, a trust issue for a company, that's okay. Let's talk afterwards.
So any other questions? Otherwise, you can stick around for a little bit, meet
Sure.
the community.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you all. I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I just want to thank SG Innovate for hosting us tonight. They've been very great to the community. Also thank, obviously, Michael from INFURA, as well as MetaMask, and ConsenSys as well for providing the booze and the food. So special thanks to ConsenSys. Thank you very much.